And welcome into this special edition of Now and Next. It's been a while since we've been in the inbox, but glad to be here. Hope your summer's going well. And today we're going to take some time and reconnect with a longtime acquaintance and colleague, Rocco Rossi. And many of you will know Rocco as the former CEO at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. Also ran for mayor back in 2010. But he has been around the city of Toronto and certainly influencing social and policy issues in Ontario for some time. But if you follow him on social media, you will know that Rocco has done several Camino pilgrimages through Spain, Portugal, or in France, and so on. And he's been very vivid in terms of his description of how they play out, his own personal experiences with them. Well, he has turned that experience, he's transformed that experience into a novel. And the novel is called Finding Grace. It's a bestseller on Amazon. So we caught up for, a few hours one morning back in May or so, had coffee, and Rocco gave me the book. I had the opportunity to read it recently, and it's not just a story, it's just a novel about someone who travels the Camino. It's about the effects of the Camino and the way we can kind of instill the effects of the Camino. Doesn't matter if you're religious at all. It's not the issue. It's seen as a religious pilgrimage historically. But it tells the story that I think is universal. And it really is kind of a cool thing. It talks about the gifts of stillness, the lessons of the pilgrimage, and making time for ourselves and how important that is. It was an exercise, as Rocco puts it, in decompression. Yeah. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Rocco Rossi, author of Finding Grace. I think it's an opportune time. It's a really opportune time to be talking about Rocco Rossi's new book, Finding Grace, only because I guess you and I met for coffee. Was it back maybe May-ish? May, early June, something like that?
Yeah. End of May, beginning of June.
Yeah, and I had just come off of a trip with my in-laws and my wife, and we had been a couple of weeks or so in Portugal and Spain, and this led us to, I think you picked it up online when I was commenting on it, and you were saying, oh, by the way, you had a fascinating experience with the Camino pilgrimages over the years, and I had known that, I had watched and followed that, but that you had written this book, Finding Grace, and we'll get into the roots and so on and everything else of it. But you have just finished 24th one now.
Yeah, just about 700 kilometers from Bilbao to Santiago through the mountains on a route called the Camino Olvidado, or the Forgotten. Yeah,
I was going to say that there are so many here, and again, you make the point in the book and various interviews that I've seen. People will say, "Well, where's the starting point?" And the starting point is pretty much kind of like the weather; it's wherever you are.
Yeah. Well, think about it. This pilgrimage began in the Middle Ages, and there was no planes, trains, and automobiles to get you to some special starting point. You started wherever you lived. And the net result is there are an almost infinite number of paths through Europe. But because of mountains and rivers and infrastructure and towns, these tributaries feed into 4 or 5 major routes that all end up in this northwestern town in Spain called Santiago de Compostela, where the church tells us the remains of St. James the Greater, Apostle of Christ, are buried.
And historically, not to get too far down in the weeds on this, but the whole point of this was St. James was, an evangelist. He was there to convert or to get conversions to the early church.
Yeah, in the Acts of the Apostles after the crucifixion, all the apostles headed out into the known world to preach the good news. And St. James got the Iberian Peninsula assignment and was maybe the worst salesman in Christian history. He managed to convert a handful of people and decided to go back to Judea, and was the first of the apostles martyred after Christ. He immediately ticked off the local government, and Herod Agrippa had him beheaded. And his two disciples took him back took the body back to Spain, and nothing further is heard until the mid 800s, when a hermit sees a vision that he's to go to a field covered in stars, Compostela, where he will find a tomb, and in it are the remains of St. James. And he's subsequently become the patron saint of Spain, and in death converted far more than in life.
So I was going to say, it was after the fact that James would have had that level of influence, shall we say, an early influencer in the church, and it's remarkable to think, and I realize there was a certain amount of corruption that was always associated with the pilgrimages, because there were, as you described, there were professional pilgrims who would go out on the behalf of others and collect fees so that they could get the blessing that was associated with the pilgrimage. But what's remarkable to me is that story, more than 2,000 years ago, give or take, still resounds and is still at the heart of human nature.
Yeah. Well, and it was important beyond religious reasons. It was important for political and strategic reasons, because mid 800s was when the Moors invaded Spain. And they would rule almost all of it for the next 600 years. And so the king of Asturias, who was one of the last of the Christian monarchs in the north, had a vested interest that these remains were the remains of St. James, because he used that and the pilgrimage as a rallying cry for all of Europe to come and assist him in reconquering Spain, which would then take 600 years. But a chain of fortresses and monasteries and churches was built across the north of Spain to provide shelter, accommodation, and protection for pilgrims, but also served as forward operating bases for the Reconquista.
So the irony in all of that is completely contrary to the themes in the story and the learnings in the book Finding Grace, because it's all more or less about shedding those mortal confines and being able to kind of take stock of where we are, less so around the politics and the conniving that went on around it, but to really kind of center ourselves in what we do, what our value is, the importance of our relationships, and particularly the relationship we have with ourselves, I think comes through in the book.
Well, I think, the Camino and pilgrims aren't expected to be perfect. And so actually the mixed messages of the beginnings and the origins is all part of the human condition. And what I love about the Camino is a little bit, you're following gravel paths a lot of the time, and people are often complaining about the gravel, but it makes me think of a wonderful story about Michelangelo when he first presented the David in Florence, and people were amazed because they looked at the statue, and if you look closely, you can see the veins, you can see the musculature. It's almost as if the David could walk off the pedestal and join everyone. And one of the audience said, "Master, how is it possible that you take this cold piece of stone and create this incredible piece of art?" And he said, "It's really quite simple. I simply chip away that which is not David, and the David reveals himself." And the gravel is the chipped away stuff for all of the pilgrims who've gone for over 1,000 years, to chip away that which is not Dave, that which is not Rocco, and reveal the authentic self underneath, if that's what you are seeking.
The book starts with a very dramatic scenario, and it's life-altering in many ways. And I think the main character in there is a complicated guy, and in some respects, those of us who might have experienced a character like that in our lives would look at him from afar and say, we would want to be that. Yeah. Is that fair? Yeah. And I think and the cool part about it is that very quickly in your description of the character, you learn, I don't want to be him.
Yeah. Look at, as you say, it's a novel. It's not autobiography, but, you clearly can't write what you don't know or you haven't experienced. And certainly there was a time in my life when I would have been the guy with the bumper sticker that said, he who dies with the most toys wins. And it's about accumulation and the key character, as you say, complicated, Tony Bird / Anthony Aucello. He's been climbing the corporate ladder, most of his life, and he gets to the top, and a tragedy, exposes that maybe that ladder is leaning up against the wrong building. And maybe the things he thought were so important didn't seem that important when, he saw friends die and he saw his mentor die and decide that, he needs to seek out, answers for what he's going to do with the rest of his life.
Yeah. That his ascension is seemingly predetermined based on the way this is all playing out. And, he's the next one who's going to be in the corporate world blessed. He ends up being blessed in a very different way as a result. But he seems to come to the conclusion or realization in a hurry, whether he wants to admit it or not, that the big job, the CEO job that he would presumably inherit is not for him after all.
Yeah. Well, the person who was his mentor and the former boss, who dies in the tragic event at the beginning of the book, he goes to that man's funeral and is confronted by the man's daughter, who asks point blank, why you and not him? Why did you survive and my dad is in a box? And all the money in the world, all the power, didn't have an answer for that, and forced him to think about whether the prize was really worth it or whether the chalice once obtained was poisoned.
Yeah, and it's a dramatic and maybe in some cases extreme, but when you look into it, we've all kind of had that experience at some form several times in our lives where, somebody close to us dies unexpectedly. Somebody close to us takes a long time in dying. Somebody leaves us. I love the at the end when all of the pilgrims are saying goodbye to one another and they're promising to get together again soon or see each other soon. And I realize, that happens every day in our lives. That happens, at the New Year's party. We don't see each other often enough. We're going to have to get together, and we never do. So it's one of those things where this sort of the Camino experience actually plays out in our lives on a daily basis, and we're not really aware of it.
100%. In many ways, the Camino is simply a microcosm of life, but it's on steroids in the sense that in life, in our day-to-day lives, the distractions, the noise, the appointments, the responsibilities drown out any attempt at figuring out if this is really what you want or not. It's, to take another cultural reference, David Byrne and Talking Heads, and waking up one day and said, my God, how did I get here?
Yeah.
In the Camino, because it provides you the time and the space, you're walking 6, 7, 8 hours a day, often than not on your own. And that alone time is the real gift of the Camino. It's something that we don't typically have in our day-to-day lives. So you're right. We have the deaths. We have the comings and goings of people in our lives. But the time to reflect on that we don't have. I often tell people that I fundamentally believe that Nietzsche got it wrong. God is not dead. But as the psalmist says, be still and know that I am God. Stillness has been taking a beating for the last several hundred years. And something that can provide you with those moments of stillness is really a blessing.
Yeah, and it's funny, the other side of that, and I just had the recent experience of spending the better part of a week with my kids, my adult children, and their children. And quite frankly, it was sort of a combination of merriment and mayhem, and at high speed. There was a high level of energy, as you can imagine, sort of 10 and under, and away you go. But in those moments of chaotic merriment, I kind of had that same feeling of everything slowed down for me. And I looked at it and I thought, this is the last summer that she's going to sit on my knee because she's getting too big. Or this is the last summer he's going to need to be pushed on the swing. It's hard to kind of come to terms with those moments of stillness, to your point, when we're so tied to phones and social media and all the other demands, that happen in life.
And that's the fundamental reason that this medieval practice, pilgrimage, which is present in virtually every culture, continues to this day, because it meets that need that we have. When I first walked the Camino in 2002, fewer than 60,000 people registered that year at the Pilgrim's office. This past year, close to 600,000 did, and we're on track to being well in excess of that this year. So there's clearly something that people are seeking, and they're finding in following this ancient trail.
What does that tell you about us, though, in the present moment? I mean, when we spend so much time, doom scrolling and every day we kind of hang on the headlines. And I think, Rocco, we probably are, as much and all as we talk about news and information being mistrusted and in declining, I think we're more tied to news and information headlines than ever. And to some degree, that has become this, anchor that we carry around with us that wasn't anticipated. So, in that context, what does that tell you about the attraction of the Camino?
Well, it's interesting, the news point, and given the day that we're recording this on, we can't avoid giving a shout out to the friends and family of Lloyd Robertson, and what a terrible loss that is. But he was a symbol of a time in media when you were entitled to your own opinions, but you weren't entitled to your own facts. There was a time when if I turned on the TV in the US and 80% of the adults would have watched Walter Cronkite, or in Canada, Knowlton Nash and Lloyd Robertson, and there would be a basis for discussion. Now, you talk about the doom scrolling and the rest. There's a fragmentation of media, and yes, we're distracted and drawn in on that basis, maybe more than ever before. But it's everyone with alternate truths, and that I think is just adding to the anxieties and the illness in the world that something like the Camino or other practices like that are really about. How do we step back from that and get some perspective? How do we reclaim our lives? How do we reclaim the dialogues that are important to us? And it's hard to do that in the middle of this, constant stream of information. And so when I'm on Camino, my phone is a camera, except for 1 hour a day when my family can reach me and when I can check emails. But it is a opportunity to disconnect in a way that is virtually impossible in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, it's funny when I've heard you talking about this before, and I've watched and I've followed some of the posts that you've had previously before the book. And then as I, read the book, and I was thinking, a lot of people will look at this experience and say, hell, I'm not doing that. I don't want to rough it. I don't want to have to be away from my phone, but I would like to be saved.
Well, look, grace is a gift and can happen whether or not you're walking the Camino. There's a constant debate on the Camino. There's class system introduces itself everywhere, and so some people talk about the difference between peregrinos or pilgrims and turigrinos or tourists. And a wise pilgrim once told me, Rocco, it's impossible to tell from the outside. The real difference is the pilgrim, the tourist, the turigrino visits the Camino, whereas the pilgrim is visited by the Camino. And that only happens on the inside. So I hate to say that you have to put yourself through the blisters and the sore knees and all of the rest, but there is an incredible focusing quality to making your body work. All your senses become enhanced. Your sense of taste improves. There is no greater appetizer than walking 25, 30 kilometers. Food tastes great, and you eat because you're hungry, not because it's dinner time. And that definitely adds to the experience. Plus, the neuroscientists will tell you that repetitive physical activity can engage the left hemisphere of the brain, which actually frees the right hemisphere to meditate. And so, interestingly, long-distance walking has always been far better for me for meditation than any attempt I ever made at, getting into a half or full lotus position, which is next to impossible, and stuff keeps, rattling around inside my brain, but get me out on the trails, and there's an incredible peacefulness that comes over me.
So, the character in your book, Tony Bird, he not only is converted on the path to Santiago, but he readopts his original name. So we see that conversion. Had you experienced that with other pilgrims where you've seen they started out as the tourist and somewhere along the line there was an epiphany with a, lowercase d perhaps, but an epiphany nonetheless where they said, this is what I am about?
Yeah, it's an environment where it's very difficult to remain immune to the opportunity of change. And I say that not saying, as some people try to almost anthropomorphize the Camino. They give it special powers, and they say the Camino provides and the Camino is magical and the rest. I'm not in that camp. I'm a believer that all of us contain magic, that we're all creatures of the divine and therefore share in the spark of the divine and have that magic. It's just that that magic gets dulled by all of the nonsense that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. The Camino provides a time and a space, but that opportunity for change and that transformative power all comes from within. It's the David within the piece of marble, to use Michelangelo's terms. And it's hard to walk in the footsteps that millions of people have walked, since the mid 800s. And whether you're religious or not feel the kind of residual energy, of that, and the encounters that you have and the people, make it so special.
Well, and hence the book Finding Grace, and figuratively and literally, that's what this narrative is about: finding the grace in your life and grace for yourself. But at the same time, grace is a key character.
Yes.
In the book, and the way it's introduced, and it was really interesting, where Tony Bird has kind of hit the heights, and now he's just plummeting. He's drinking. He's an addict. He's all these things. He's at, even the people at the hotel are worried about his state of being in terms of, how he looks, smells, and behaves. And he gets this mysterious package in the mail, and it effectively is from someone who has walked the Camino on his behalf. And, the story begins almost as the story ends, because he ends up giving back. But the fascinating part about it is he has no idea who this person is or what the hell's going on. So this is, to me, is probably the most important part of his journey. The fact that he has realized there's somebody out there who knows who he is, what his circumstances are, and they have found it appropriate and necessary to walk the Camino for him. And he gets the blessing of her effort.
Yeah. Well, there is this long tradition of walking the Camino on behalf of others. And the Latin term is vicari pro, on behalf of. And as you stated earlier, in the Renaissance, during the period of the sale of indulgences, this was organized and professionalized, to the point where there was a professional class of pilgrims that would walk on behalf of wealthy people who would pay them half up front and half when they returned. They didn't want to have to deal with the blisters and the distance. Thankfully, the sale of indulgences ended, but the vicari pro tradition continued on. And to this day, when you arrive in Santiago, you can ask that someone else's name be attached to the written blessing that they give you. So yes, this woman that he does not know, and he had no knowledge of the Camino before he receives this package and starts putting the words into the Google machine to determine what in fact it was, comes to him at a moment where he's hit rock bottom. And those are typically the times when you then look for some kind of lifeline. And in this case, someone has done this extraordinary thing on his behalf, and it raises questions that he needs answered. And so he buys a ticket and heads to Pamplona to try to sort it out.
And not to spoil it, but he finds grace.
Yes.
And figuratively and literally.
Both figuratively and literally.
Yeah. And the story of Grace is as important as Tony's story, because hers comes out of an estranged family, her own, what she thinks she has damaged her own family, and is trying to make amends, but has not been in contact with them for years and years. Yet she's out, walking the Camino for so many other people, right?
Yeah, it's, look, sometimes, there has been a sort of a growing discussion that, that there's too much I in Camino, that it's just about your own personal journey and your own personal growth. And there's certainly lots of that. But the Camino also gives us the opportunity to celebrate and support the connection that exists between all of us. And the whole Vicari Pro tradition, and what Grace has been attempting to do for decades of walking, is to serve that community purpose, and to understand that we're connected. And so when we see trauma in the world, when we see people in great difficulty, there are acts that we can take. And she seeks her own redemption through that path.
But she also uses Tony to reconnect with her family, her estranged family, yes. Right?
Yeah. And I'll let people read the book to understand the vehicle for that. But, it's been so many years for her that she doesn't feel able to be the one to make the extension to her family, but Anthony can, and does, and we see what follows.
Mm-hmm. So as I'm going through this, and I'm realizing that there are people who will walk the Camino and in someone else's name or honor, etc., and the blessing comes to them. And in his case, he reacts, I wouldn't say badly. I mean, he's kind of taken aback by it, but it kind of brings to the forefront all of the trauma that he had suffered, not, also recently. And that was what prompted Grace to walk for him. He does the same thing for someone else. And the young woman in the story very vividly responds, because all of a sudden she asks, why you, the same way, a great recall there. But at the same time, she doesn't want to relive her trauma. That to me was, that's how a lot of people might react to that. And so when you do this, back to, the I in Camino, it became very apparent that you've got to be aware that, yes, I'm doing it for Rocco, but this might be something that Rocco is going to have a hard time handling. And I don't know how you sort of square that circle.
It's a great question. I'm a big believer at the end of the day that, since my very first one, all my subsequent Caminos, I've done Vicari Pro. And in each case, I've brought the Compostela, the written blessing, to the person or persons that I was walking on behalf of. And, not all of the reactions have been initially positive. Mm-hmm. Because, as you say, people living with trauma may want to bury it. But trauma has a way of coming back, and understanding that others see you and feel that pain and acknowledge that pain and are thinking about you and thinking about the situation in every single one of the cases has ultimately been seen as a positive. And so I hang on that experience.
So, and in the postscript, you tell the story and the backstory of Mary Catherine Kimpton, and I'll let folks kind of get into that on their own. But she and her husband, I guess, you guys were sort of quasi introduced to one another before your first Camino. And when you get back from your trip, you find out that Mary Catherine had been killed in a car accident during the Camino. And then you subsequently went back, did the Camino again in her name. Would you have ever done another Camino without her or without that experience?
It's a really good question. I think so, but maybe not the next year. And certainly, having done the second one with the Vicari Pro motivation, which became the motivation for many more, it's certainly been an enormous part of why I'm a full-blown Camino addict now, and always planning the next one. So it definitely was a major impulse for the second one, and the experience turned out to make the Camino even richer than when I was doing it just for myself.
And to be clear, you really didn't know her. You had been introduced to her.
No, we
peripherally.
She and her husband Harry and I had independently read a series of articles by a Toronto Star reporter by the name of Rob Crew, who had recently walked the Camino himself. And, we had both reached out to him independently, and he said, well, look, you guys are heading out about the same time. Why don't you consider meeting or maybe spending the first few days on the trail together? Just, get your legs under you, and who knows what follows. But their schedule and mine didn't align. And as you say, when I returned, she was struck and killed instantly by a drunk driver. It was in 2002. It was another World Cup, and in one of the rounds, Spain had won, and someone had been celebrating a lot, and she was crossing the road to a town called Estella on the French Way, and was killed instantly. Interestingly, the Spanish government built an underpass at that spot, and no one has since died. Certainly on that spot, although pilgrims die on the Camino every year. And Harry built a stone monument to her and a plaque. And unfortunately, the stone monument has been removed, but the plaque has now been placed on a wall of honor near the underpass.
So when you finished the second Camino in her name, I'm presuming then that you presented the blessing to Harry.
Yes.
And how did that meeting go?
It was emotional and raw and wonderful. And we ended up hugging for half an hour. It was a remarkable experience, and he very much appreciated it.
Did Harry ever do another Camino? Do you know?
Well, he went back to build. He hand built a stone monument, stone and mortar, and put the plaque. He never walked the Camino again.
So there's so many threads in this story, and all of them are fascinating to chase down. You've said you've done 24. That's a considerable number. The last one was 700 kilometers. I mean, at that rate, you're on your way to the moon here, pal.
Well, I've done roughly 15,000 kilometers, which is, about 350 marathons, or going, from Newfoundland to BC and back again, a la Forrest Gump Canadian style. Look, at as long as my knees and back hold up, I will do more. The people often ask me, well, look, you can go anywhere in the world. Why do you keep going back to that part of the world and walking Camino? And I say, well, you have a great friend, and would you only ever want to visit them once? Or you love chocolate cake and pizza. Are you going to limit yourself to one piece in your life? When you find something that brings you joy, that feeds you energy, the real question is, why don't you do it more often? For me, the Camino is like that announcement at the beginning of every flight. In case of decompression, masks will fall from the ceiling. Make sure you put it on yourself before you try to help anybody else. And at least once a year since 2002, except for COVID, and now multiple times a year since, that's been my oxygen mask that helps me be a better me and helps me be more effective when I'm here in the day-to-day world.
Are you more resilient as a result of this, or are you just discovering your resilience?
It's a great question. I think it's a combination of both. I think, again, our authentic selves are incredibly resilient, but our day-to-day lives have weakened them. And so we, by having this kind of experience, it both strengthens it and reminds you that there's great stuff to work with.
I don't know, it takes a lot of planning, but, you talk about those, 15,000 kilometers, et cetera. In one Camino, you're going through more than one pair of shoes, right?
I typically go with two pairs, a pair of sandals to rest my feet from time to time, and then some sort of trail runner. I made the mistake of using hiking boots on my first Camino, and I'll never do that again because there's no technical hiking, and heavy boots are just make your feet sweat and are the key to Blisterville. So I typically go through that pair of shoes, and this time I didn't even bother to bring the shoes back to Canada. I dumped them in the garbage at the airport on the way and just came in my sandals. There was no reason to waste jet fuel on them.
They've served their purpose, indeed.
100%.
And is there a plan for another one?
Absolutely. I am thankfully in a stage in my life where I have a little more flexibility, and I do project-based work. And when the project ends, then I'll be heading back. And I've done some stages in France, but the 10, 11 days between Le Puy en Valais and Conques in France are particularly spectacular. And I'd love to go and do the whole of that section. And there's another, it's not a Camino de Santiago, but it's an important pilgrimage called the Francigena that starts in Canterbury and ends up in Rome. And I wouldn't do the whole distance the first time, but I'd love to, from the Swiss border to Rome, walk a few weeks of that. So those are the next two on the list.
So, at the tail end of the story about Tony, then, and he comes and he finally sees the St. James Cathedral, and I think it's really interesting the way you've kind of gone from this medieval surrounding, and slowly he walks into the suburbs, and the world becomes more modern, the world becomes more urban, and all along the way there had been guidance, there had been signposts, there had been this way to wherever. Once he gets to his destination, there are no more signposts. He now has to carry on in the world on his own. And I thought it was kind of a cool way to finish that with the expectation there is reentry here. Do you find it's difficult to make the reentry back into the regular world?
There are issues of reentry every time, and I've learned to make that transition better by the first couple of times I got to Santiago and immediately came back, which I recognize as a mistake. Now I plan and make sure that I have at least a few days post Santiago to walk a little bit more and process what's gone on. Because it's interesting, our West Coast First Nations have a saying that people should never move faster than they can walk or paddle. Because if they move faster, they separate from their souls. And it was very interesting. The very first time I got to Santiago and then, and I'd walked almost 1,000 kilometers, at the pace that you could walk. And I got on a bus, to go to Madrid, to get the plane. And in a couple of hours, I covered what took me a month. And the disorientation is incredible. But the point that you make as well, a wise person once told me that the Camino doesn't end in Santiago. It begins there. Until Santiago, you have the yellow arrows, you have the scallop shells pointing the way. Once you get there and you come back and you re-enter, then you have to seek the arrows in your heart. And making sure that you keep that vibe, and you keep that sense of direction, in the reentry, is stuff that, I've worked on over the years and I think have gotten a little better at.
Well, I was interested to see that, Tony ends up, in front of the statue of Saint Anthony, and he is the patron saint of the lost. And I swear to God, Rocco, he gets a workout at our house,
yeah.
Because, especially with the grandkids, I can't find mine. So we had a very traumatic situation with a stuffed animal recently. Yeah. So we had to pray to Saint Anthony to make sure we found. But it was, those small things all of a sudden where, and I think that's the realization. You could walk by that statue every day, and not until the experience Anthony or Tony had did it matter at all. So, to your point, where you had the guidance and the arrows and so on, the signposts along the way to get you there, the next part of that journey, I dare say, would require far more discipline and awareness than perhaps the 1,000 kilometers of the Camino.
It's a very true remark, but that's part of the gift of the Camino, if you will, is the practice in the discipline. It's more difficult because, having attention and being in the moment is far easier when all you're worrying about is walking, eating, sleeping, and repeating. When you've got everything else, staying focused in that moment and listening to the inner voice inside that's helping you with direction, is harder, but it gets better. And certainly 24 Caminos have helped. And going through the process of writing, you asked when we had that breakfast meeting, why a novel and not a memoir? There are a lot of wonderful memoirs and journals about the Camino out there, but I didn't want Finding Grace to be Rocco's story. I wanted it to be the reader's story. And I just find the novel provides a format that allows people to see themselves. If you've lost things, if you sought career change, if you've had crises in your life, if you've lost people, you should see yourself in this book, and hopefully it helps you probably not provide answers, but maybe help you refine your questions.
I would also suggest that it gives you the opportunity to realize that there is grace in your life and take the time to recognize it. And
Every day.
right?
Every day.
And we don't give ourselves enough permission for that.
Yeah. No. And it's, again, in part because, we're told with every commercial, with every ad, that we should be wanting something else. It's the pursuit of happiness. It's not the celebration of the happiness of the moment. Pursuing never ends. But happiness can be a state of mind.
Well, it's not, this is your first book. Are you going to write more?
Well, we'll see. It took me 23 Caminos in 20 years to write this one. I also have tens of thousands of photographs. So, my wife and a number of friends have been pushing me to do a companion piece, which is just, basically a photo essay book, a coffee table book. And, so I am working on that.
Yeah. Well, it's a best-selling book on Amazon, and I would encourage you to take a look at it. Whether, in fact, you feel the need or the urge to experience the Camino in person, but this rendition of the journey is fascinating, and it's eye-opening all at once. And congratulations, Rocco. I know this is a huge effort, and whenever you do this, as you say, there's some of you in it. So there's a level of vulnerability and courage that goes into this kind of effort. So congratulations on that.
Well, I really appreciate it. And the response has been amazing, and being a bestseller. But, for me, the two things that have most been rewarding, aside from simply writing it itself, which helps you process the experience, but the two things that have really pushed my buttons, one, the Toronto library system has bought copies. And for a kid who didn't have money growing up to buy books at home, the library was my doorway to adventure and curiosity, and the thought that my book is out there and someone else might see it is an incredible source of joy. And the second was a grade 8 teacher of mine, junior high teacher of mine who now lives in Nova Scotia, or I know you have family as well, wrote me and wrote a review to say, look, I knew this man when he was 13 years old, and I was 23 in junior high school, and this is a book you've got to read. And hearing it from Miss Dawes means a lot.
Yeah, and it's funny how you don't realize the impact that you are having when you're doing this kind of thing, and then all of a sudden somebody from your past or that you haven't talked to, and again we're back to the promises in the square after Camino, right? We all end up in the same place at some point. It's fascinating, right? So it's not just coincidence. It's the God wink that happens every once in a while. Rocco Rossi, thanks for this. You've been generous with your time, and thanks for sharing your story.
Well, thank you for the opportunity for sharing it, and hopefully it encourages some people to take it out of the library or get it on Amazon, and would love to hear your reviews.
Yes, and again, the book is called Finding Grace. You can find it on Amazon, as Rocco noted, or in the library. And we'll put the details in the show notes for you. So if you want to check out his website and see what's there and how you can get the book, by all means, or maybe you want to give it to somebody you know. And you know what? If you've traveled the Camino, if you've done the Camino pilgrimages, I'd be curious to hear back from you, just in terms of what you think of the conversation that we've just had. and how it resonates with you, because it will be, as Rocco suggests, a unique experience for everyone. But there's so much that is in common that his story really will resonate with many of you. So anyway, thanks for joining us. And this is a bit of a departure. I know it's normally politics and policy, and it was nice to get away from the doom scrolling, though, right? All right. I hope you get to enjoy this glorious summer here in this part of the world, and we'll talk to you soon. It's Now and Next. I'm Dave Trafford.